I started in education as a high school teacher, and really it's come back to that, you know? And in the beginning I thought, okay, urban farming, I need to sell vegetables at a market or to a chef, and that's what's gonna make it. So I think that dream, totally unsuccessful. You know, I'm not doing that, but I think it's shifting this other way, and you can hear laughter behind me probably. As a community organism, so we're a collective of different nonprofits and for-profit entities working in and around horticulture and agriculture as a community organizing tool. It has very little to do with my direct input today, and that to me is something that's sustaining and living on its own.
And then we learned this was not going to stop. This was just the beginning.
But there are climate signifiers everywhere in the film, which is what kind of draws me to it in my project.
So one of those seems to be, you know, we're going to all drop our individual self-interests and we're going to come together and tackle the problem.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the big themes of the film is that a better future is possible, but only if we all work together to get there. So you have the nations collaborating to build the Jaegers, and then even in the Shadow Dome, which is kind of the base where the Jaegers are situated, you have a veritable army of technicians, engineers, scientists, other personnel, all working to maintain these giant robots and make sure they're ready to go. And then you have the pilots themselves. You need 2 pilots to man a Jaeger. No victory is won alone. Everything is done in collaboration, and everything is only possible by dint of that immense collaboration.
This is why I think your research is so smart, because I think there are so many metaphors out there, and I can't help but wonder if the writers and the directors and the cast of this weren't thinking about climate catastrophe or environmental catastrophe while they were making this movie. It seems kind of implausible to me that they wouldn't have been, given all of these connections to climate and environment. But it takes someone like you to illuminate that for a broader audience. Can we see some live ones?
Yeah, for sure. This is the same species that you're looking at upstairs. This is called the Cropper cervicornis, aka staghorn coral. It is like one of the foundational species in the Caribbean. The reason being is that it grows really fast. It builds these really amazing branching structures that provide a ton of habitat to the fish. So like you have all these crossing branches, and like every single nook and cranny that those branches create when they cross is like an awesome home for a fish. So that white tip, that is called their apical polyp, which basically is just a fancy word to say like the place that they're growing from. It's white in color because it doesn't have symbionts in it yet. So the symbionts will kind of like crawl their way up and populate that tip as it keeps growing. But for now, that's like the newest growth. It hasn't had time yet to have the symbionts populate it.
In terms of how people are working together after a natural disaster, is thinking about fear not as just a negative, but as something that can propel people to invest in the concerns of those affected who are not your own, right? These roads is a foreign power. It's interacting with these other ancient Mediterranean states, but they're under no real obligation to help roads by a treaty or anything. So thinking about fears, economic or otherwise, as a creative force and something that can drive us forward, I think that really resonates today with globally, really, when we're having these international congresses that are hoping to tackle climate change jointly as nations, right? And that we're seeing it as something that's affecting us all. And if I can build from this exploration of the Rhodian earthquake a sense of hope and ideas of how we as international communities can come together in the face of disastrous events, that would be incredibly fruitful, and I would be incredibly pleased with the results of the dissertation.
There was so much in the movie, especially when I saw the first cuts, that was absolutely gorgeous. The overhead shots, you know, this flying through nature, as well as the really, really personal conversations that were being had with some of the people in it. I watched it and I couldn't not feel attached to it. And in, hearing what Arian wanted in terms of the sound world and the meaningfulness of a lot of what was being said, I immediately understood that there was a deep, really deep personal connection to it. That really inspires me to step up and say, okay, I need to make this music what it is. I need to make something that really represents the world being contained in this story. And so for me, it was just a mixture of a beautiful, beautiful film mixed with a deep, deep personal intention that convinced me I really need to work on this, and immediately I was drawn to working on it.
What makes me passionate about climate activism is that it is tied to every other form of activism.
I think we live in a really stressful, isolating world, and I think art is one of the few refuges we have from that.
As much research and education and facts there are out there, sometimes it takes that emotional buy-in from an audience member to really feel like they're empowered to make change. So I think that's what the arts add to the whole climate conversation. And sometimes it just takes being able to see yourself in a story to be able to be a citizen who also makes those changes.
I just think there's a lot of beauty out there, and we have to do our part to be able to keep that beauty going forward.
I went to White Point Beach and I just painted plein air outside, and so the reason I was doing that is that, like, for me, I'm chronically ill and disabled, so going to natural sites is more of like a difficult thing for me to do. So I wanted to show like what it's like to be able to connect with nature when you're disabled, and also what it's like to be in LA when getting to those sites is a little bit harder for someone like me.
As a public health major, I've seen a lot of disparities in health access, and when environmental exposures happen, it seems to impact the same communities. So I'm really passionate about advocating for community engagement and making sure that they're informed about what is going on.
When we began our breeding research, we brought different wild kelp plants to a farm environment to test how quickly they grew, how heat tolerant they were, and how many nutrients they took from their environment. We predicted that we could generate a new phenotype called non-reproductive kelp using the genetic resources established in our initial breeding project. We then used genomic analysis to predict which kelp parents should be paired so that their offspring would be sterile, like how a horse and a donkey can both be fertile, but their offspring, the mule, cannot reproduce. This process is non-GMO because it does not involve gene editing and instead relies on existing natural genetic diversity in kelp, where some of them cannot reproduce.